Close your eyes for a moment and let the weight of the day slip quietly from your shoulders. Imagine you are standing at the edge of a vast dark forest, or perhaps a lonely stretch of wind-blown dunes. The sky above is washed in a dim, dusky gray, neither night nor day caught in that soft pause between heartbeats. It's here, in this tender hush, that we begin our slow descent into the forgotten corridors of human history. Somewhere beneath your feet, beneath layers of cold earth and patient stone, sleep secrets so old they no longer have names. Lost civilizations whisper from beneath glaciers. Ruined chambers sigh beneath sands that have moved like tides for thousands of years. There are vaults sealed tighter than any tomb, ancient maps etched on ivory that show coastlines no living. I remembers, and stones that once answered questions with a subtle, trembling hum. These are not merely relics of curiosity. They are puzzles that even our sharpest minds, our brightest instruments, cannot yet solve. So let yourself drift. There is no need to strain for answers here, only to feel the gentle thrill of possibility. Science has tried to carve clean lines through history, to categorize and explain, to shine bright lights into every shadow. But sometimes the shadows push back. Sometimes instruments fail, compasses spin, and brave explorers retreat with more questions than they carried in. Tonight, together, we will wander softly through these places where certainty falters, where the ground might hide vast machines, older than the Ice Age, where cities may sleep beneath shifting dunes, their towers swallowed whole by time. We'll trace strange geometric patterns beneath ancient glaciers, stand in ruined monasteries above sealed chambers that shimmer with an unexplained force, and run our fingers along stone columns that disappear beneath rough seas. And through it all, I invite you to let your thoughts wander. There is no pressure to remember the details or solve the mysteries. This is not a test, it's a gentle unearthing of wonder. Let these stories wash over you like a slow, dark tide. Feel the slight chill, the delicious uncertainty of not knowing what waits in the deep. Because in the end, maybe the greatest comfort of all is this simple truth. For every question we answer, countless more lie just beyond reach. The world is still bigger, stranger, older than we can ever truly grasp. So settle in, breathe slow, and let us begin our quiet walk into the unknown. Beneath the crushing silence of Greenland's endless ice sheet, where winds sweep unbroken for miles and the sun sometimes forgets to rise, there lies something profoundly unsettling. It begins with subtle deviations, instruments that flicker and die, magnetic readings that dance wildly across dials, or GPS signals that drift as though led astray by an unseen hand. Scientists who came to study climate history, armed with drills, sensors, and bright rational minds expected ancient secrets, yes, but nothing quite like this. It started with core samples, long cylinders of ancient ice drawn up from depths that predated any trace of human civilization. Within these frozen time capsules lay telltale flecks of soot and pollen, snapshots of prehistoric forests. But then, deeper still, came odd contaminations, minute fragments of carbonized bronze, microscopic filaments of glass, residues of combustion that had no place in the serene epochs these layers recorded. Materials born of intense controlled heat. Materials that should not have existed tens of thousands of years ago. The findings were quietly contentious. Official reports framed them as contamination from modern machinery, easy to say, difficult to prove. But off the record, in late-night discussions over tired cups of coffee, more unsettling theories unfurled. What if some unknown civilization once harnessed fire and metallurgy long before the Sumerians set down their first bricks? What if we were merely the most recent inheritors of a world that builds, collapses, and forgets? These whispers grew louder when satellite imaging picked up vast, grid-like patterns beneath the ice, geometric alignments stretching for miles. They were too regular, too measured to be mere quirks of geology. One exploratory team tried to drill closer, hoping to catch a glimpse of what lay below. But their rigs failed, again and again, power cutting inexplicably, drill heads snapping, sensors refusing to calibrate. It was as if the very ground rebelled at the intrusion. And then there were the hums. A young technician, isolated at the Pun's edge of a camp in Antarctica, once radioed in breathlessly to report a low, resonant sound vibrating up through the soles of his boots. He said it felt less like a noise and more like a pulse, an almost organic rhythm that seemed to recognize him, acknowledge him. He laughed it off afterward, blamed nerves and loneliness. Yet he refused to work alone again. Others confessed, in careful, hushed admissions, that they sometimes felt watched. Not merely the prickling paranoia of isolation, but a profound, ancient regard, like standing under a cathedral's dome and sensing that something vast and invisible was studying them in return. Instruments left overnight in these zones occasionally recorded subtle electromagnetic fluctuations, repeating in patterns that were oddly deliberate. Eventually, funding waned, permits lapsed, and teams withdrew. Officially, these sites remain climate research zones valuable for understanding the past to protect our future. But off the books, their coordinates are quietly redacted. Satellite images blurred just enough to keep curious eyes moving along. What sleeps beneath these glacial tombs? Is it the skeleton of a lost city, sprawled across what was once fertile land before ice conquered it? Or something stranger still, some vast machine whose purpose we cannot begin to guess, now lying dormant under centuries of frost? Could these humming frequencies be the last echoes of a mechanism slow into silence after tens of millennia, waiting with patient alien grace for a hand that remembers how to waken it? Even now, when the wind falls away entirely, leaving only the soft groan of moving ice, those who remain say there's a quality to the quiet that feels almost sentient. As if the ice itself holds breath, listens, remembers. We leave eventually. We always do, pushed back by failing equipment, frayed nerves, or simply the weight of mysteries too immense to shoulder. But the grids remain, inscribed in secrecy beneath tons of indifferent ice. The traces of inexplicable metals and forgotten fires linger in laboratories, filed away in archives under innocuous labels. And somewhere down in those frozen depths, perhaps old engines or buried temples continue to hum ever so faintly, whispering to the darkness in voices older than memory, not demanding to be understood, only waiting to be found again. In the gentle hills of Abruzzo, Italy, where olive trees stretch their twisted arms toward a mild sun and ancient roads wend lazily through sleepy villages, lies a town called Atri. At first glance, there's little to set it apart from countless other rustic corners of Italy, weathered brick facades, narrow alleys that echo with the distant murmur of conversations, and the comforting scent of warm bread drifting from old kitchens. Yet Atri holds a secret one that begins not in myth, but in the dust of an ordinary construction site. It was 1998 when workers digging near the Cathedral of Santa Maria Assunta struck something unexpected. Their shovels uncovered a small sealed chamber, perfectly dry despite the damp earth. Inside they found clay offerings, ancient fragments of tablets, and most striking of all, a circular slab of dark basalt, nearly 6 feet across and polished to a glass-like sheen. Its surface was etched with spirals, constellations, and symbols no one could immediately read. Many assumed it was merely a relic, a Roman altar, perhaps, or some ceremonial plinth. But carbon dating of surrounding artifacts shattered that assumption. The chamber was built around 1300 BCE, centuries before Rome's foundation. Intrigued, archaeologists and linguists poured into Atri. They puzzled over the inscriptions, which bore no resemblance to Latin, Greek, or even Etruscan. One linguist suggested they seemed structured not for reading, but for speaking, perhaps a language of incantation or chant. Yet it was the villagers, the old families who had lived in Atri for generations, who offered the most tantalizing clue. In hushed voices, They spoke of a tale seldom shared, of the whispering stone that could answer questions. According to this legend, the chamber had once been a place of quiet pilgrimage. Those seeking guidance, whether on love, war, or matters of life and death, would enter alone. They'd sit across from the stone, lay both palms on its cold surface, and pose a simple yes or no question. Moments later, clarity would flood their minds. It felt, they said, like an idea planted gently into one's thoughts, too certain to doubt, yet undeniably alien. Skeptics dismissed it as local superstition, but the architecture of the chamber hinted at deeper purpose. Its acoustic properties were uncanny. A whisper uttered in one corner traveled perfectly to the opposite side, magnified yet softened, like the hush of distant surf. When modern researchers mapped the sound fields, they discovered standing waves formed at precisely the places a supplicant would kneel. It was as if the room itself was designed to cradle a human mind and sound. The mystery deepened under more empirical scrutiny. Dr. Emilia Rocca, an electromagnetic specialist from Florence, spent a year studying the chamber and the Patna basalt stone. Her instruments recorded faint magnetic fields pulsing along the stone's surface, fields that subtly mirrored fluctuations in the Earth's magnetosphere, particularly during solstices. When weight was applied, like two hands pressing down, these pulses changed, forming intricate patterns that seemed anything but random. Rocca speculated, cautiously, that the stone might stimulate neural responses in the human brain, evoking sensations of certainty or even external thoughts. If so, was this device a ritual tool born of chance or of astonishing design? Was it simply exploiting natural properties of sound and magnetism? Or had some unknown culture intentionally crafted a machine for communion with something beyond themselves? But whatever power it held appeared bound to its birthplace. In the early 2000s, to preserve it from humidity and vandalism, authorities moved the Oracle Stone to a secure climate-controlled facility. And just like that, its whispers fell silent. Visitors reported nothing unusual, no tingling in the fingertips, no sudden flashes of understanding. The stone was now little more than a beautifully carved relic. Its chamber, empty of its heart, became an acoustical curiosity without a voice. Even stranger, when acoustic archaeologists recreated the room's resonance digitally, they found that the original frequencies could induce low-frequency vibrations in the human chest, just enough to be felt, but not consciously heard. Perhaps the answers the stone gave were born of this delicate physical manipulation, shaping emotions and thoughts by vibrating the very vessels of breath and blood. Today, few in Atri speak of the stone. Most pass by the old excavation site without a second glance, children racing over the ground that once held so many secrets. But every so often, someone leaves a candle at the entrance to the now-locked chamber, a quiet acknowledgement that some mysteries deserve a respectful distance. And on rare nights, when fog curls low through the streets and the wind stills entirely, locals say the air around the cathedral grows heavy. Those brave enough to pause there claim they can almost hear something in that hush, a delicate syllabic murmur, not quite caught by the ear, as though the stone itself, even miles away and long silenced, still tries to answer questions we have not yet learned to ask. So we are left with an enigma, a device or altar that seemed to know truths beyond its age. A room tuned like a musical instrument to the shape and vulnerability of the human mind. Was it ritual, was it science, or was it some tender, terrifying overlap of both? In Atri, the whispers have faded, but the questions echo on, haunting reminders that for all our modern certainty, we still wander among the half-seen footprints of civilizations whose understanding of nature and soul might have surpassed our own. Long before the world was charted by satellites and stitched together by flight paths, there were stretches of Earth so remote, so unrelenting, that they seemed to exist outside of time itself. One such place is the vast Rub al-Khali, the Empty Quarter, a desert that rolls across the Arabian Peninsula in shifting golden seas. It is a landscape that swallows memory. And yet, for centuries, travelers whispered of a city hidden somewhere within its dunes. A place of towering pillars, unimaginable wealth, and a pride so terrible that it drew the wrath of the heavens. They called it Ubar, mentioned in old Arabic texts and even in the Qumran as Iram of the Pillars. Ubar was said to be ruled by people whose arrogance matched the height of their stone columns. Their riches came from frankincense, the fragrant resin, once worth more than gold, carried by caravans that traced delicate spiderweb routes across the sands. According to legend, when these people grew too cruel, their city was struck down in a single night, buried beneath the desert as punishment. For generations, skeptics dismissed the tale as myth, a moral story meant to keep mortal ambition in check. After all, no ruins had ever been found, no fragments of pillars or shattered gates to suggest such a city had stood. The desert was masterful at hiding its secrets. Then, in the early 1990s, the myth twitched and breathed again. A joint team of archaeologists and geologists, using satellite imagery originally captured for NASA's Space Shuttle program, noticed faint, crisscrossing lines etched into the dunes. These were no natural formations. They were ghost trails, ancient caravan routes worn deep by countless hooves and wheels, all converging on a single forgotten point in Oman. Hope flared. Could these paths lead to the lost Atlantis of the sands? When they finally began to dig at the site near Shisar, the sand yielded its prize with deceptive ease. Excavations revealed stone walls, fragments of pottery, incense burners, and most strikingly, the remnants of enormous limestone pillars collapsed into the ground. It was enough to convince many that they had found Ubar, or at least one incarnation of it. But then came an explanation both simpler and stranger. Geologists studying the terrain discovered that the city had been built atop a vast limestone cavern. Over centuries, the chamber's ceiling weakened under the weight of walls and towers. One day, it simply gave way. The ground beneath Ubar yawned open, swallowing streets, homes, and dreams in a sudden monstrous sinkhole. With time, the desert winds swept in, smoothing away nearly every trace. Yet even this elegant geological account could not silence the older, more unsettling stories. Among the Bedouin tribes who still traverse these lands, the memory of Ubar carries a different weight. They speak of nights when the ground beneath the city would hum a deep, resonant vibration that trembled up through sleeping bodies, unsettling herds and making children cry out in their sleep. Some said it was a sign of the cavern shifting, the earth warning of its own instability. Others believed it was the city itself, alive in some dark way, singing out from pride or pain. Artifacts recovered from the dig only added to the puzzle. Some of the trade beads found at the site came from as far away as India. Pottery shards bore designs unlike those of any known regional culture. A few pieces of ceramic were inscribed with markings that defied translation, hinting at influences or visitors long forgotten. The layers of settlement suggested that Ubar, or perhaps multiple Ubars, rose and fell in cycles, each time swallowed a little more by the desert until it finally vanished. In the years since the initial discovery, other teams have returned, drawn by the tantalizing possibility that even more lies hidden beneath the dunes. Some fringe researchers have proposed that Ubar was not a single city, but part of a network, a chain of oases and fortresses that rose and fell with the fragile lifelines of subterranean water. Perhaps it was this delicate balance that gave rise to the legend. When the underground rivers shifted or dried up, entire communities would vanish, giving birth to stories of divine retribution. And there are still stranger hints. A few kilometers from the main excavation, a small, curiously shaped artifact was found carved from local stone, polished smooth, and inscribed with spiraling symbols. It resembled a miniature tower, or perhaps a marker. Some speculate it was a warning, placed there by the last survivors to tell future wanderers of the danger lurking beneath. Today, Shisar is a quiet place again, watched over by goat herders, and visited by the occasional academic. The sinkhole remains, a vast wound in the earth that tourists can peer into, though few linger long. When the sun sinks low and shadows stretch across the sands, the winds seem to play tricks, sending low curling tones that echo strangely off the limestone walls. Locals still say that if you stand there in the twilight hush, you can hear a sigh or a chord that seems almost too deep, too deliberate, to be the mere voice of shifting air. Was Ubar destroyed by geological misfortune, by the slow betrayal of its foundations? Or did something older, stranger, claim it, punishing pride with oblivion in a story as old as civilization itself? The evidence, scattered in broken pottery and buried walls, answers only the simplest questions. For the rest, we are left with folklore, the kind that nestles uneasily at the edge of reason. And perhaps that is why Ubar still haunts us. It is a reminder that the past holds more than facts. It holds echoes and half-heard songs, waiting to rise from beneath our feet when we least expect it. That somewhere in the world's loneliest places, cities may still breathe in secret, whispering through stone and sand long after their people are gone. There is a wind that forever sweeps across the coast of Northern Ireland, pulling at the edges of memory. It tangles itself in sea spray, curls around rocky promontories, and carries old stories across centuries. Here on the coast of County Antrim lies a place that seems pulled straight from the marrow of myth, a place the locals call the Giant's Causeway. At first glance, it is almost playful. More than 40,000 stone columns, most of them perfect hexagons, crowd together like a giant's game of pickup sticks frozen mid-fall. Some rise into squat pillars, others form stepping stones that invite daring feet to cross. Tourists tread carefully along these weathered paths, snapping photos, marveling at the neat, unnatural geometry. It is, they're told, the clever handiwork of an ancient volcano. Lava, cooling rapidly, fractured into these elegant shapes some 50 million years ago. It is a tidy story, wrapped up by geologists and offered to visitors with scientific confidence. But stand there long enough, especially in the hush just after dawn or when the sky hangs low with fog, and something in the tidy explanation begins to feel thin. The stones stretch out toward the sea, vanishing beneath gray waves that churn as if hiding secrets. And it's there, beneath the cold Atlantic, that the mystery deepens. Modern sonar scans, performed by marine geologists mapping the seabed between Ireland and Scotland, have revealed that these neat columns don't end at the water's edge. They continue under the sea, marching away from the cliffs in the same impossibly ordered ranks. For hundreds of meters, the stone forms a kind of submerged road, lost to human eyes except through blinking digital monitors. Then, remarkably, it seems to point directly across the channel toward Fingal's Cave on the island of Staffa off Scotland's coast, where matching hexagonal columns emerge from the sea like a cryptic reply. To scientists, it remains a spectacular example of parallel geological events. They explain that the same ancient volcanic fissure stretched beneath the sea, cooling in symmetrical cracks on both ends. But local legend tells it differently, and it is the legend that lingers like salt on the air. According to Irish folklore, these stones were no accident of magma. They were built by Finn MacCool, a giant with more pride than sense, who longed to challenge his Scottish rival, Benandinner. Determined to stride across the water without wetting his massive feet, Finn gathered up rocks by the armload and laid them carefully into the sea, constructing a causeway so he could cross and face his enemy. Some tales say he won the battle. Others claim that when he saw how enormous Benandinner truly was, Finn fled back to Ireland, tearing up parts of the causeway behind him so he could never be followed. Either way, the stones remain a colossal testament to hubris or fear, or perhaps simply the playful imagination of people trying to explain what felt too deliberate to be natural. But not all questions have found homes in old stories. Divers, who have explored the underwater stretches of the causeway, report an odd quiet, a heaviness in the water as if it presses back with a will of its own. Sonar readings have mapped the columns extending deeper and branching in unexpected angles, hinting that far below the visible formations, there may be even larger geometry structures too massive, too aligned, to dismiss outright. Some scans picked up voids, boxy and regular, lurking beneath layers of stone. When research vessels returned to investigate, strange electrical glitches haunted their equipment. Cameras shut off, compasses wavered. Readings became garbled with static. It was as if the seabed wanted its secrets kept, one researcher said later, half joking, though his eyes didn't quite match the smile. Locals who live along these coasts have always treated the causeway with a kind of wary reverence. On certain evenings, when the tide draws back and the stones glisten in retreating water, some claim you can feel a faint tremor underfoot, like the echo of heavy footsteps returning. They tell stories of fishermen whose nets caught not herring, or crab but black, glistening stones shaped almost like tools, too symmetrical, too polished to be explained away as broken fragments of basalt. Often, these fishermen returned the objects to the sea, mumbling small apologies into the wind. Even visiting scientists, trained to roll their eyes at folklore, find themselves speaking in softer voices here. It's the most precise chaos you'll ever see, one geologist once remarked, standing amid the pillars, so perfect it feels wrong. And so the mystery stands half in sunlight where tourists giggle and climb, half submerged beneath dark waters that guard their riddles. Closely, was this truly just an accident of lava and time? Or could it be the skeletal remains of something older, some vast architecture now disguised as geology? Perhaps the stones were once steps for giants, or the edge of a road that led somewhere we can no longer reach, stretching away beneath the waves into history's blind spots. Next time you find yourself on that coast, breathe in the salt and listen. Let the steady drum of waves on stone fill your chest. Look out toward the horizon where the columns slip beneath the sea. You may feel it, a subtle tug, an invitation to follow, to wonder just how far that ancient path might still run under cold Atlantic waters, and what waits, still perfectly hidden, at the other end. There is a silence that lives high in the mountains of Central Asia, a silence so deep it feels sacred. Snow gathers in wide drifts along narrow ridges, pines stand watch in dark clusters, and the air itself seems brittle, ready to crack at the slightest sound. Most who hike these remote trails speak only of the breathtaking vistas, the icy streams, the stark thrill of loneliness. But there are some who come back with stranger stories. Hikers have long whispered about odd sensations underfoot. They describe certain stretches of trail where the ground seems hollow, where their boots send back a faint metallic echo. Others report standing very still and feeling a low vibration, a subtle hum that rises through the solace of their shoes, into their bones so slight it almost seems imagined, until they step away and it stops. Locals shrug off these tales. Old mountains shift, they say, as if that explains the curious regularity. It was only in the late 1990s that this quiet mystery collided with modern curiosity. A team of geologists contracted to survey the area for potential copper deposits arrived with portable seismic rigs and an appetite for data. They expected to find typical variations in mineral content, perhaps some hidden ore veins. What they found instead made them drop their instruments and stare at the readouts in disbelief. The seismic pulses returned patterns that were too clean. Beneath layers of unbroken rock that by all accounts hadn't been disturbed for tens of thousands of years, lay a dense, symmetrical structure. The echoes suggested long repeating lines like rails or conduits, stretching horizontally in parallel formations. One stunned technician joked, that it looked like the footprint of a buried train station. But laughter faded quickly, they decided to drill a narrow exploratory shaft. Just a few meters down, the drill bit struck something it shouldn't have. Not fractured stone or compacted sediment, but solid metal, smooth, cold, and oddly uniform. Samples retrieved by the coring rig baffled metallurgists back at the lab. This was not steel, not copper, not any alloy they could easily identify. It resisted corrosion, carried faint magnetic signatures, and held warmth slightly longer than expected, as if it retained energy in ways no ordinary material could. Encouraged by their initial findings, the team pushed for deeper drilling. That's when stranger details emerged. The drill cores revealed grooves along the metal surface, shallow ridges spaced with mathematical precision like veins on a turbine blade, or cooling fins on an engine. One engineer, inspecting the samples under a microscope, muttered, "This isn't random. Someone made this, or something." Word of the anomaly trickled up official channels. Within days, the project was quietly shut down. The team was ordered to pack up and leave. No formal explanation was given. Regional authorities cited environmental protection protocols, but no one believed that. After all, mining surveys were routine. Why single out this harmless drilling? Some suspected a deeper concern. Perhaps the governments involved feared what they might uncover. Or worse, feared who else might be interested if the discovery went public. Months later, an anonymous paper surfaced online, published by someone claiming to be a member of the original team. In dry, clinical language, the author described seeing more than just metallic cores. He mentioned imaging equipment that captured a rotor-like assembly embedded in quartz, its contours almost delicate, like a flower frozen in crystal. He wrote that the object showed signs of having once moved, rotated, or spun, though it was now locked in geological stillness. Shortly after, the paper was scrubbed from digital archives, its citations erased. The author never posted again. Today, hikers still pass through those lonely ridges, unaware of the secret slumbering beneath their feet. But some notice things like the way compasses twitch oddly in certain clearings, or how camera batteries drain faster, forcing photographers to swap packs more often than usual. And then there are the vibrations. A low, almost musical thrum that seems to bloom right up out of the earth. Stand there long enough, they say, and it feels like the mountain itself is breathing. Or dreaming. Speculations flourish in dark corners of the internet. Some fringe theorists insist it's an ancient machine, built by a civilization lost before the last ice age, something designed to harvest geothermal energy, or perhaps regulate it. Others whisper it's older still, crafted not by human hands at all, but by something else entirely, an artifact left behind in a time when the planet was ruled by minds, unimaginably different from ours. More cautious voices suggest a simpler explanation. Perhaps these are just rare natural formations, mineral deposits crystallized under odd conditions that mimic artificial patterns. But even skeptics hesitate when confronted with the precise symmetry of the grooves, the rotor shapes embedded. In quartz, the inexplicable alloys. Rocks don't spin themselves into turbines. Mountains don't lay out metal pipes with perfect spacing. So the silence remains. The ridge is unmarked on most maps, the location kept deliberately vague by those who know where to look. No official expeditions return. No new surveys are permitted. And yet the ground still hums, softly, persistently, as though the machine buried deep within is not dead at all, merely sleeping, waiting for some unknowable signal to stir once more. Perhaps one day, someone braver or more reckless will drill again, chasing that vibration down into the dark, determined to see what lies at the heart of the mountain. Until then, the machine rests hidden beneath ancient stone, its purpose lost, its makers forgotten, whispering faint secrets through the solace of wandering boots to any who pause long enough to listen. In a quiet, forested corner of northern Europe, stands the skeletal remains of a monastery most maps no longer bother to mark. The walls, long since surrendered to moss and creeping ivy, rise in jagged lines that vanish beneath layers of fallen leaves local villagers rarely visit. They say it feels heavier there, as if the air is burdened by something left unsaid. But the ruin itself was never more than a curiosity until a team of historians arrived in the mid-1990s, hoping to catalog forgotten religious sites with modern ground-penetrating radar. Expectations were modest. Most medieval monasteries reveal predictable stories, stone foundations, wine cellars, shallow graves of long-dead monks. Yet when the radar swept across this site, the returning data came back strangely clean. Beneath the ruin, 6 meters underground, was an anomaly. A large, perfectly rectangular void, untouched by the centuries. It wasn't a crypt. It was too large, too isolated. Nor did it seem to have any tunnel or stairway leading down to it. Whoever sealed it did so absolutely, with no intent of return. The historians, at first elated, petitioned for a careful excavation. Months of bureaucratic wrestling finally granted them a permit, and by late summer, a small excavation pit cut through the undergrowth. As they reached the top layer of stone, hopes were high for illuminated manuscripts, maybe forgotten relics of saints. What they found was something else entirely. The chamber walls, when finally exposed, were not built from the local granite typical of the region. Instead, they were formed of dark, polished basalt, so smooth it gleamed in lamplight, so dense it muffled sound, turning voices hollow. This was not medieval work. Not even Ramang. The style was alien, utterly out of place amid Europe's layered history. Carefully, the team drilled a narrow borehole into one wall and fed a fiber optic camera inside. At first, the footage showed only a dim gray haze. Then, it adjusted, sharpening into astonishing detail. The chamber was lined with shelves carved directly from the basalt. Upon each shelf sat rows of identical clay jars, each sealed with dark resin that had survived the centuries intact. At the center stood a low pedestal, bearing a single flat stone tablet etched with symbols that defied instant recognition. Hours of footage were replayed over cramped camp tables. It was during one of these sessions that a technician spotted something chilling, just 2 frames, almost imperceptible. A shimmer, like a ripple of heat, hovering above the pedestal. It was not a trick of the lens or dust caught in the light. Multiple reviews confirmed it. There was a distortion there, hanging in the cold stillness of the vault. Afterward, some team members refused to watch the footage again. Debate ignited immediately. Some suggested they were looking at an ancient time capsule, a desperate attempt to preserve knowledge through catastrophe. Others argued it could be the last record of a society that vanished before written history. The symbols on the tablet certainly didn't resemble any known European script. No Latin, no runes, no local dialects. The grooves seemed to follow a spiral geometry, less like writing and more like a code meant to be deciphered through alignment, or perhaps even resonance. When finally granted permission to breach the vault, the team proceeded with utmost caution. They drilled tiny pressure valves into a few of the clay jars before breaking the seals. Each jar hissed faintly, releasing air held captive for countless generations. That alone was a technological riddle. Ancient pottery was never designed to be pressurized. Yet here were vessels maintaining delicate containment for what carbon analysis would later suggest was at least 2,000 years. Inside the first jar was not parchment or scrolls, but a fine metallic dust. It sparkled under the lights with hints of copper, and something else, something magnetic, that made nearby compasses twitch. Subsequent tests would reveal traces of rare earth elements not commonly found in the region, raising questions about ancient trade routes or forgotten mining sources. But deeper mysteries persisted. How had this material been ground so uniformly, almost nano-fine? What was its purpose? Ritualistic? Industrial? Or something else entirely? Arguments broke out among the archaeologists. Some believed this vault predated the monastery by millennia, perhaps constructed by a culture wiped away by plague or shifting empires. Others wondered if it was even European in origin, positing the vault could have been transported stone from some far-off land as part of an unknown pilgrimage or secret order. But then there were darker theories. Whispers that this chamber was not a repository, but a safeguard. A place meant to trap something, not simply store it. After all, the monks who built above it left no mention of this foundation in any surviving records. It was as if acknowledging its presence was forbidden, or perhaps simply too dangerous. In the end, controversy killed the excavation. Funding evaporated under political pressure, and local authorities sealed the site under the banner of heritage protection. The team dispersed. Some published carefully neutral papers, skirting the more sensational aspects. Others vanished into unrelated careers, unwilling to risk reputations on something they could neither explain nor prove. Today, the vault rests again in silence beneath the skeletal monastery, surrounded by wildflowers and whispering birch. Travelers who wander off marked trails sometimes pause at the ruins, struck by a sudden coldness that seems to seep from the ground. A few even claim they hear faint vibrations if they lay their palms flat on the old stones, like the echo of distant chanting, or perhaps something stirring impatiently far below. And somewhere, deep inside that sealed chamber, the shelves still stand in perfect order. The jars still sit, holding their unknown contents. The tablet still rests on its pedestal, quietly waiting for eyes brave enough or foolish enough to unlock whatever message it carries. Above, the forest grows undisturbed, roots twisting down as if trying to reach what humanity was ultimately too cautious to uncover. Or perhaps too wise. High above the emerald vastness of the Amazon rainforest, where thick clouds drift lazily and parrots glide like drifting paint strokes, something extraordinary hides beneath the green. To the casual observer, it's an endless sea of trees. But to those who've peered through the forest using LiDAR, laser scanning technology that slices away vegetation like peeling back skin, it reveals a world no one imagined existed, that it began quietly in the early 2000s. Archaeologists flying over southwestern Amazonia in simple laser pulses at the canopy. When the processed images returned, researchers stared in stunned silence. There, beneath centuries of untouched jungle, were enormous geometric earthworks, circles, squares, and interlocking rectangles carved into the land with shocking precision. They weren't random clearings or natural features. They were human-made, deliberate, and they stretched for miles. As LiDAR mapping expanded, the shapes multiplied. Soon they uncovered what appeared to be remnants of vast ceremonial complexes, raised causeways linking geometric enclosures, broad avenues that might have once hosted processions, and strange mounds aligned to solstices. Some formations spanned hundreds of meters, large enough to swallow entire city blocks. What's more, radiocarbon testing of the soils and surrounding organic material placed many of these structures at over 3,000 years old, long before any known complex civilization was thought to exist in this part of the world. It flipped the story of the Amazon upside down. For generations, scholars insisted the rainforest's poor soils could never support large populations or monumental architecture. The jungle, they argued, was simply too hungry, too relentless in reclaiming anything humans dared build. At best, isolated tribes eked out modest lives. But the earthworks told a radically different tale. These were not signs of small, scattered settlements. They pointed to organized societies capable of mobilizing labor forces across vast distances, of planning with mathematical sophistication, of marking the landscape itself with meaning. Indigenous elders from nearby communities weren't surprised. Their oral histories long spoke of forest ancestors, the builders. They sometimes called them, who raised temples and earth mounds where they danced under moonlight, only to vanish when the rivers changed course or sickness swept through. The land. These stories were often dismissed as myth, poetic memories of simpler pasts. Now they read more like whispers from an older, almost forgotten chapter of human achievement. Among the most astonishing discoveries are what many believe to be buried temple complexes. Unlike the open geometric geoglyphs, these sites lurk entirely beneath the jungle floor. LiDAR reveals faint but unmistakable outlines, concentric platforms, radiating pathways, and what might be collapsed plazas. Excavations are painstaking routes, and the sheer density of the forest make progress brutally slow. But at certain digs, archaeologists have unearthed polished stone altars, intricately carved pillars, and shards of pottery painted in pigments that still cling stubbornly after millennia. One temple uncovered near the Rio Branco showed evidence of astronomical alignment. Small standing stones embedded in the earth formed sight lines that perfectly bracketed the sunrise on the winter solstice. It suggested that far from being simple forest dwellers, these people mapped the heavens, tied their ceremonies to the movements of the cosmos, and perhaps built their lives around rhythms larger than the jungle itself. Yet the deeper mystery is how such sophisticated societies could thrive here for so long and why they disappeared. Some researchers believe these ancient Amazonians engineered the very soil beneath their feet. Patches of terra preta, or black earth, dot regions near major earthworks. Unlike the jungle's normally thin, acidic soils, terra preta is rich, dark, and startlingly fertile, created through the deliberate addition of charcoal, bone, and compost over generations. It may have allowed intensive agriculture that supported tens of thousands until ecological shifts or imported diseases shattered their careful balance. Others look to climate. Long before European contact, severe droughts swept the Amazon. A civilization built on elaborate water networks might have withered as rivers dried, their temples swallowed again by relentless green. And so the forest closed its grip, wrapping vines around stone, burying memories under centuries of moss and leaf litter. But there's another, quieter question that haunts these discoveries. Just how many more lost temples wait beneath the canopy? LiDAR surveys cover only a fraction of the Amazon basin. Each new scan reveals dozens more sites, hinting at an entire interconnected landscape, a web of ceremonial centers, villages, and engineered fields stretching from Brazil to Peru, from Colombia to Bolivia, dot the indigenous groups who still call the forest home. Sometimes visit these old places, leaving offerings of fruit, flowers, and whispered prayers. They say the spirits of the builders linger, patient and watchful. To them, the temples are not dead ruins, but sleeping giants, powerful and deserving of respect. It's a perspective that modern archaeology, with all its metrics and models, is only beginning to embrace. Meanwhile, as satellites map new swaths of forest and excavation teams plan cautious digs, the realization grows that our old stories of the Amazon as an untouched wilderness, as a place hostile to complexity, were myths of their own. The forest is a library of hidden cities, a living archive that keeps its secrets close until the time is right. Someday, perhaps we'll stand on a fully uncovered temple platform under the same sun that once guided its builders. We'll see the precise geometry, feel the deliberate shaping of space meant to draw eyes upward, and understand that these were not just people of the forest, but architects of it, designers of a green world we're only just beginning to rediscover. And when we do, it won't be simply a matter of rewriting textbooks. It will be like meeting forgotten relatives across the gulf of time, finally recognizing that the Amazon's greatest story was never just about trees, but about the people who dared to master them and the temples they left behind, still dreaming under leaves. Beneath the rolling hills and tranquil farmlands of Europe lies a mystery so vast, it quietly reshapes everything we think we know about our distant past. Hidden beneath the roots of vineyards in France, under sleepy Bavarian meadows, and even beneath bustling modern towns in Austria, archaeologists have uncovered an astonishing web of prehistoric tunnels carved by human hands, thousands of years before the first known cities or kingdoms ever took shape. The story begins almost by accident. In the 1990s, while digging foundations for a new wine cellar in southern Germany, workers broke through to a narrow stone-lined passage that twisted deep into the earth. Local authorities assumed it was an old medieval hideaway, but as archaeologists crawled inside with measuring tapes and carbon dating kits, the true age of the passage shattered expectations. It was over 5,000 years old, older than Stonehenge. Older even than the Great Pyramids. Soon similar discoveries followed across Europe. In Austria, small farmers drilling irrigation wells struck hollow spaces that led to more of these tunnels. In Scotland, ground-penetrating radar revealed entire branching systems beneath heather-covered hills. From Spain to Slovakia, a forgotten network slowly emerged, stretching thousands of miles in total. The passages were typically just wide enough for a person to squeeze through, meticulously cut into rock with astonishing consistency. Many ran for hundreds of feet before opening into tiny chambers that looked almost like shrines. Why would prehistoric people, long before the age of advanced metal tools or written language, labor so intensely to create this underground maze? Theories abound. Some suggest they were trade routes, subterranean highways that allowed people to move safely across hostile landscapes teeming with predators or rival tribes. Others argue they were purely ritualistic, designed as initiation paths for shamans or rites of passage, forcing participants to journey through darkness to reach some sacred chamber. But then there's the unsettling geometry. Unlike natural caves, these tunnels follow deliberate lines. Some align astonishingly close to cardinal directions, while others trace out curves and angles that seem almost mathematical. In one remarkable example near Salzburg, a branching tunnel system appears to form a giant spiral when mapped from above, so precise it suggests a knowledge of geometry far beyond what archaeologists once believed. Neolithic communities possessed. Further complicating matters are the artifacts sometimes found within these stone arteries. Polished beads of jade and amber that originated hundreds of miles from the site hint at trade or shared rituals spanning vast distances. In one section beneath rural France, researchers found a clay vessel filled with charred herbs, its contents chemically matching psychoactive plants still used by shamans in far northern Europe today. Were these tunnels not just physical pathways, but spiritual ones, corridors into altered states meant to connect people with unseen realms? Even more curious is how uniformly these tunnels were constructed, despite being scattered across different cultures and language groups. Their entrances are often cleverly hidden, sometimes beneath ancient stone slabs or in the corners of now collapsed dwellings. Inside, the ceilings are uniformly low, forcing anyone who enters to stoop or crawl, a posture that some anthropologists think was meant to humble travelers, psychologically preparing them for what lay ahead. What's perhaps most haunting is how many of these tunnels simply stop. The passageway will continue for dozens of meters before ending abruptly, as if whoever was digging simply laid down their tools one day and never returned. In other places, the tunnels are deliberately sealed with tightly packed stones, often accompanied by small offerings, bones of birds, tiny bowls of ochre pigment, or mysterious carved figurines, suggesting the closures were more than practical. They were ceremonial acts, like closing a door to another world. Local folklore has long whispered about these hidden veins beneath Europe's fields. In Bavaria, farmers once spoke of the Erdstwell, the places of the earth, believed to be homes of spirits or gateways to the underworld. Children were warned not to play near old sinkholes, lest they hear voices calling them to wander forever in darkness. Similar stories ripple through Scotland and Galicia, where small folk or fae were said to move unseen beneath the hills. Modern archaeologists despite satellite mapping and 3D scans, are still largely baffled. Each new excavation brings more questions. Why such enormous labor to carve narrow, often claustrophobic tunnels that connect no obvious settlements? Why invest so much in passages that, by all evidence, were never meant to store food, house the living, or even bury the dead? And why do they echo the same architectural language: low ceilings, tight walls, sudden chambers across thousands of miles and countless tribal boundaries? Some researchers have proposed that the tunnels may represent Europe's first truly continental cultural phenomena, shared set of beliefs and practices stretching across prehistoric tribes. Perhaps these dark corridors were neutral zones, places where ancient enemies could meet under common ritual, bound by rules older than war. Or maybe they were woven through myth and fear, constructed to honor or placate the unknown forces people felt stirring just beyond the edge of firelight. Whatever their original purpose, the tunnels endure, stubborn and silent. They snake beneath highways and apartment complexes, beneath pastures where sheep graze, oblivious to the hollow earth below. They are Europe's hidden circulatory system, carrying the ghostly memory of an age before writing. Before empires, an age when the most profound mysteries of life and death were answered not in temples that reached for the sky, but in narrow stone arteries that led instead into the patient, waiting dark dot. And so the network remains, an enigma beneath our feet, older than our histories, perhaps even older than our oldest fears, whispering that once, long ago, Europe's greatest architecture wasn't built above ground at all, but hollowed deep into the bones of the earth itself. Beneath the sunlit streets of Malta's small town of Paola lies something that feels less like an archaeological site and more like the hollow chest of a living giant. It's called the Halseflini Hypogeum, a sprawling underground complex, older than the pyramids, carved from soft limestone over 5,000 years ago. To walk its winding passages is to step into a realm where every breath, every shuffle of a foot, seems unnaturally loud, as if the very walls are listening. At first glance, the Hypogeum appears to be an elaborate necropolis. Its chambers are tiered on multiple levels, linked by narrow staircases and sudden drops that spiral down into shadow. Niches carved into the stone once cradled human bones, offerings of ochre, shells, and small figurines. Some rooms contain low platforms that look like beds, though whether they were for the dead or for ritual participants preparing to commune with the beyond is anyone's guess. But it's what happens when you speak here that truly sets this place apart. Archaeologists in the early 20th century first noticed it. A whisper could carry impossibly far, wrapping through corridors to emerge from dark doorways many meters away. Later, sound engineers discovered why. One particular chamber, dubbed the Oracle Room, was meticulously designed to resonate at about 110 Hz, a frequency that directly impacts the human brain's limbic system, the region tied to emotion and memory. Modern tests have shown that chanting or speaking at this pitch doesn't just create eerie echoes. It can trigger altered states of awareness. Volunteers exposed to these tones in the Oracle Room reported dizziness, vivid mental imagery, even feelings of floating. Some compared it to stepping outside their bodies or hearing voices that weren't their own. The effect was so pronounced that neuroscientists studying the site suggested the builders must have understood, at least empirically, how to manipulate sound, and, through it, human consciousness. It paints a haunting picture. Imagine robed figures, gathered in flickering lamplight, a low chant starting in one corner of the chamber. The sound would build, not merely bouncing off walls, but seeming to come from inside the skulls of those present. In such an environment, the line between the living and the spiritual could easily blur, whether by design or by the natural susceptibilities of the human brain. Local legends, of course, have long whispered of stranger things. Some say that people who enter the Hypogeum alone risk hearing voices that call them deeper, luring them into side passages that twist in impossible ways. In the early 20th century, a visiting school group reportedly became disoriented within the lower levels. For hours, the children were lost, though their guides insisted they hadn't strayed far from the main chamber. When found, they were terrified, claiming they'd heard singing coming from walls that pulsed as if alive. Official records downplay the incident, but among Maltese families, the tale still circulates as a warning not to wander there unwatched. There are also older stories, passed quietly, among island elders of people who vanished entirely. One such tale tells of a woman searching for her cat who slipped through a narrow crevice in the hypogeum's lower levels. She was never seen again, though locals sometimes say you can still hear faint mewing deep beneath the stones at night. Whether myth or garbled memory, these accounts echo modern concerns. The hypogeum's lower chambers have long been sealed off due to structural fragility, but also some whisper, because more recent visitors emerged disoriented, physically ill, or with memories that didn't quite match reality. Certain paranormal enthusiasts argue that the specific frequencies generated by chanting, or even footsteps here, can induce trance states, opening doors inside the mind that aren't so easily shut. Meanwhile, archaeologists grapple with the sheer question of intent. Was this mastery of acoustics purely accidental, the byproduct of carving chambers in certain proportions? Or did the builders experiment, adjusting curves and ceilings until they achieved the desired effects? Some researchers point to subtle architectural tweaks, slightly curved walls, ceilings that dome inward at mathematically precise ratios, as evidence that these ancient masons knew exactly what they were doing. If so, it suggests the hypogeum wasn't merely a tomb, but a sophisticated instrument, giant resonating chamber meant to guide human consciousness into ritual states. Perhaps it helped mourners feel closer to departed loved ones, or served as a training ground for oracles and priests learning to interpret visions. The site's orientation and certain motifs carved into its wall spirals, eyes and waves reinforce the idea that it was as much about inward journeys as honoring the dead. Today, visitor numbers to the hypogeum are strictly limited, in part, to protect its fragile microclimate, which can easily be upset by too much human breath and warmth. Tour groups move quietly through the dim corridors, listening to hushed guides explain how sound here moves strangely, how the ancestors might have believed it was a voice from another world. Occasionally, someone tries a soft hum, only to feel it bloom unexpectedly inside their chest, vibrating against ribs and heart. In such moments, the ancient builders seem startlingly close, not mysterious primitives, but skilled experimenters who crafted spaces that could shift perception and evoke awe. The hypogeum stands as both monument and machine, a testament to humanity's oldest fascinations, with death, with spirit, with the unknown regions of our own minds. It invites us to imagine that in a time before written history, people already knew how to build places where reality itself could be made to shimmer and warp, all with nothing more than careful stonework and a well-placed voice. Hidden in the folds of a remote valley, where wind shapes the rocks into silent watchers and sunlight rarely penetrates more than a few hours a day, lies a cave that seems to breathe mystery. Its entrance is little more than a jagged mouth-in. The cliff face, easily missed by anyone not explicitly seeking it. But step inside, and you find yourself in a cool, whispering dark, surrounded by walls that come alive with haunting gazes. The cave was first properly documented in the 1970s by a small team of regional archaeologists who had been mapping limestone formations. They expected the usual: ancient hearths, scattered bones, perhaps crude handprints. Instead, their flickering lanterns revealed an astonishing sight: thousands upon thousands of painted figures covering every available surface, crowding ceiling and floor alike. Each figure was roughly humanoid, but with one disturbing feature in common: eyes vastly oversized, stretching across half their faces, staring back at intruders with an almost pleading intensity. What's more, the style wasn't primitive. These weren't stick figures or clumsy doodles. The bodies were rendered with careful proportions, the limbs graceful, even elegant. The enormous eyes were rimmed with intricate patterns that suggested eyelashes or radiating energy. Some figures held hands in groups. Others seemed to gesture outward, as if beckoning the viewer into their silent congregation. When researchers sampled the pigments, another mystery emerged. The ochres and charcoals were expected, typical of ancient cave art, but woven among them were traces of minerals that did not occur naturally anywhere near the region. Microscopic analysis found flecks of lapis lazuli, a deep blue stone sourced from mines thousands of miles away across deserts, over mountain ranges, from regions that wouldn't trade widely for centuries after these paintings were dated, and that dating itself remains contentious. Early carbon sampling of nearby hearth charcoal suggested an age of roughly 9,000 years, squarely within the late Stone Age, but more recent studies, using advanced microstratigraphy techniques to analyze the oldest paint layers directly, returned dates exceeding 20,000 years before agriculture, before settled villages, before most models of human migration would comfortably allow for such sophisticated, widespread art. So who painted them? And why the fixation on those enormous, sorrowful eyes? Local legend offers its own answer. Among the scattered families who herd goats in the rocky uplands, there is an old story that children whisper to each other on long, starry nights. They speak of the longing ones, beings who came from far across the night sky. These watchers walked the earth for a time, teaching songs to the wind and coaxing springs from barren stones, but grew heartsick for whatever place they had left behind. The paintings, say the elders, were left by the longing ones themselves, a way of keeping company with their own loneliness. Of course, academic circles scoff at notions of visitors from the stars. Instead, some anthropologists have proposed that the figures might represent an extinct branch of early humans, perhaps a local offshoot with unique genetic traits. Enlarged eye sockets could have been an adaptation to the cave's perpetual twilight or to hunting by moonlight on the open steppes. Skeletal remains with such traits, however, have never been found. It remains a beautiful, haunting guess. Others suggest the paintings served as a ritual catalog of ancestors or spirits, their wide eyes symbolizing a perpetual watchfulness over descendants. There are parallels in later cultures' mythologies, filled with all-seeing gods and protective totems, carved with staring faces. But none match the sheer scale or eerie repetition of these figures. That what complicates matters further is the subtle variety within the eyes themselves. In one long curving gallery near the cave's rear, the eyes shift from being round and sorrowful to narrow and almost reptilian, ringed with patterns that look disturbingly like scales. In another chamber, some figures have vertical slits for pupils, painted in bright mineral greens that still glow faintly when touched by flashlight. It's as if whoever created this art was recording not one species, but many visitors who came in different forms, each leaving their mark on this hidden sanctuary. Adding to the enigma, ground-penetrating radar surveys conducted around the cave mouth in the early 2000s revealed faint anomalies, possible voids or collapsed chambers beneath the present floor. Small bore probes sent down recovered nothing conclusive, only more fine mineral dust. Some fringe theorists speculate about buried tunnels or even mass graves of these hypothetical strangers, though mainstream archaeologists remain unconvinced. Today, the cave is protected by a fragile steel gate, monitored to prevent vandalism or looting. Still, a trickle of curious adventurers manages to obtain permits each year. Many come away moved in unexpected ways. They report a strange hush that falls once inside, as if the air itself thickens. Others speak of feeling watched and uncanny. Sense that those thousands of painted eyes still hold a spark of awareness, lingering far beyond the artist's own forgotten dust dot. it is easy to dismiss such impressions as tricks of the mind, triggered by the eerie art and echoing gloom. Yet it's equally hard to stand in that cool, dim space, surrounded on every side by silent watchers, and not feel something profound stirring under the ribs, a quiet, almost primal unease, as if we're intruding on a vigil that began long before our histories were written. So the cave remains, tucked away among jagged hills, its mysteries intact. Was it a meeting place for lost cousins of humanity, or simply a theater for vivid imaginations grappling with the darkness? Did it preserve memories of visitors from across oceans, or something stranger still? We may never know. All we have are the figures themselves, staring out with eyes so wide they seem to echo the very void they peer in, longing, perhaps, for a world they once knew, or for stories that we, the latecomers, can no longer understand. Beneath the restless waves of the Black Sea, off the coasts of Bulgaria and Turkey, there lies a silence far older than any shipwreck. Divers who explore these waters often come searching for sunken trade vessels, their wooden ribs tangled with nets and seaweed. But some expeditions return with stories of something far stranger: vast stone shapes resting under layers of silt, aligned with too much purpose to be mere tricks of geology. The first hints of these submerged ruins came decades ago, when local fishermen complained of their nets catching on old rocks in patterns that didn't seem natural. But it wasn't until the late 1990s that a team of marine geologists using side-scan sonar for an unrelated survey captured startling images on their screens. Clean, right-angled lines forming grids on the seabed, as if the ocean itself had gently laid a drowned city to sleep. Further mapping revealed plazas, what looked like avenues, and even the faint outlines of structures large enough to have once been public halls or temples. Underwater robots sent down to investigate captured eerie footage of stone blocks stacked in courses, worn smooth by currents but still undeniably the work of hands, not waves. This alone would have been enough to spark wonder. But then came the carbon dating. Samples of organic material trapped in the silt above and around these ruins suggested that this city had slipped beneath the waves over 7,000 years ago, possibly even earlier. That places its submersion around 5000 BC, millennia before the rise of Sumer or the pyramids of Egypt, during a shadowy time when most of humanity still clustered in small, scattered farming communities. So how could such a complex settlement exist back then? And why did it vanish beneath the sea? Local folklore offers its own haunting explanations. Among fishing villages along the coast, elders still speak of a great deluge, a flood sent by offended spirits or the wrath of heaven to scour arrogance from the earth. This isn't so different from tales found worldwide, from the epic of Gilgamesh to the biblical story of Noah. Some even speculate that these Black Sea ruins might be the seed of such legends, half remembered over countless generations. Geologists, meanwhile, have proposed a dramatic event known as the Black Sea Deluge hypothesis. According to this theory, roughly 7,600 years ago, melting glaciers raised global sea levels until the Mediterranean spilled catastrophically over the Bosporus. The trickle turned torrent, flooding a freshwater lake and transforming it into the chico, saltwater sea we know today. If true, the waters would have surged with a roar that could be heard for hundreds of miles, swallowing fertile plains and any settlements along them almost overnight. This theory aligns uncannily with the underwater discoveries. Sonar sweeps continue to reveal networks of what look like streets branching out from central squares, some remarkably similar in layout to later urban plans found in Mesopotamia. In a few locations, divers have found large, flat stones arranged in clear geometric patterns, almost like courtyards or open marketplaces. Potsherds recovered from surrounding areas suggest trade, craftsmanship, and a community thriving long before the sea came for it. Adding to the mystery are strange carvings on some of the submerged stones, faint but still legible. They do not match any known script and may be purely decorative, but some archaeologists suspect they could represent a proto-writing system. If that were proven true, it would push back the earliest examples of symbolic record-keeping by centuries, rewriting a fundamental chapter of human development. Despite the intrigue, these sites remain understudied. The depths are difficult and dangerous, visibility often poor, and funding for extensive underwater archaeology limited. Many nations around the Black Sea are more concerned with modern shipping lanes and fishing rights than with exploring the ghostly remnants of prehistory. As a result, much of this ancient city remains cloaked in silt, visited only by drifting schools of fish and the occasional daring diver. Still, every year brings small discoveries. In 2018, a private expedition using advanced sub-bottom profilers detected what may be larger multi-story structures beneath even thicker sediment layers, suggesting that what's visible today might only be the rooftops of a once much grander urban center. If future technology allows deeper excavation, we may stand on the brink of uncovering an entire lost civilization, one that flourished when the Black Sea was still a tranquil inland lake ringed by forests and open meadows. What did the people of this sunken city believe? Did they pray to river gods to hold back the tide? Did they sing warnings into the wind that went unheard until it was too late? Or did they simply wake one morning to find the horizon rushing toward them, a wall of water that swallowed fields, homes and memories alike? Standing on the modern shores of the Black Sea, it's hard to imagine such calamity. The waves break lazily against the sand, gulls wheel overhead, and children chase each other across small boats pulled up on the beach. Yet just beyond the reach of those gentle swells lies a profound silence, a city still standing in the dark, its streets patrolled only by shadows. So the next time you gaze out over those calm, sunlit waters, remember that beneath them rests a world we have only begun to glimpse. A world that might hold answers not just about ancient floods, but about how human beings have always built, hoped, and dreamed right up until the moment the waters came to claim it all. On the rocky shores of Lake Superior, where cold winds sweep across endless blue water and gulls cry over ancient pines, there lies a mystery that has baffled archaeologists, historians, and locals alike. Scattered across Michigan's Upper Peninsula and the nearby islands are thousands of pits, trenches, and mine shafts, silent scars in the earth that tell of a vast enterprise long forgotten. These are the prehistoric copper mines of North America, concentrated most notably on Isle Royale and the Qumran Peninsula. Unlike modern industrial mines with their dynamite-blasted craters and mechanical veins, these sites are humble yet unmistakable. Holes dug deep into bedrock, hammerstones abandoned mid-strike, and piles of discarded rock all whisper of immense effort. But there's something else, something that lifts these relics from curiosity to profound enigma. Their age. Carbon dating of wooden tools and supports left in the mines has revealed shocking timelines. Some activity here dates back at least 6,000 years, possibly as far as 8,000 older than the pyramids of Egypt, older even than Stonehenge. Long before recorded history on this continent, a people whose name we do not know were extracting native copper from the earth with meticulous skill. They used nothing like the iron chisels of later centuries. Instead, these miners employed hammerstones, heavy basalt cobbles that they wielded with precision to chip away at copper-bearing rock. Many of these hammerstones still lie in heaps beside the pits, worn smooth and pocked from countless impacts. In some areas, archaeologists have found crude but clever lifting devices made from hollowed logs, suggesting early forms of hoists. But here's where the mystery deepens. Scholars estimate that between 5,000 and 1,200 BC, these ancient miners extracted over 1.5 billion pounds of pure copper from the region. This is not a fringe theory, it's based on the scale of spoil piles, abandoned mining implements, and vast areas of disturbed earth. Such a colossal operation would have supported thriving industries, perhaps even complex societies. Yet there is no matching trail of artifacts. Unlike Europe or Asia, where the Bronze Age is marked by widespread tools, weapons, and ornaments, North America yields little evidence of extensive bronze working. Indigenous peoples of the Great Lakes did use copper for decorative items, fish hooks, and small blades, but not on a scale that accounts for millions of pounds of vanished metal. So where did it all go? This has fueled countless theories, some scholarly, others decidedly less so. Certain historians propose that copper from Lake Superior fueled a distant, undocumented native trade network stretching across the continent, with copper moving south and east in raw form, ultimately consumed in small amounts. Others believe vast quantities might still lie buried in yet unexcavated settlements, corroded beyond recognition or recycled by later generations. More sensational ideas suggest pre-Columbian contact with transatlantic traders, Phoenicians, Minoans, or even mysterious seafarers from across the oceans, who supposedly came to these shores seeking copper to feed the hunger of Mediterranean bronze foundries. Proponents point to similarities in early smelting techniques or cryptic Old World maps that seem to hint at lands west of Europe. Mainstream archaeologists, however, remain skeptical, finding no direct evidence of such voyages. And yet, the question stubbornly remains, who mined all this copper, and why does so little of it appear in North American archaeological sites? Indigenous oral histories from the Ojibwe and other local tribes do speak of old copper digging places, and sometimes of spirits who taught ancestors to shape copper. But even these rich traditions do not reach far enough back to illuminate the earliest phases of mining. To the people who lived here when European explorers arrived, the mines were already ancient, their makers unknown. Recent investigations have turned to the landscape itself for answers. Geologists and archaeologists study pollen trapped in nearby bogs, hoping to reconstruct what the forests and human settlements might have looked like millennia ago. In some cases, subtle shifts in plant species suggest the long-term impacts of human activity clearings maintained by miners for their camps and fires. Yet still, the miners themselves remain phantoms, glimpsed only through the tools they left behind. Diving into deeper speculation, some scientists wonder if climate shifts or sudden population collapses erased the communities that once thrived on copper's bounty. Others point out that a people skilled enough to mine so extensively might have migrated elsewhere, taking their cultural knowledge with them, lost to further catastrophes, or absorbed by other groups in ways that left scant archaeological trace. Whatever the truth, standing today on the forested shores of Lake Superior, amid the quiet sigh of wind through pine needles and the distant murmur of water on rock, it's hard not to feel haunted by the scale of it all. These ancient pits, softened by moss and littered with hammerstones, suggest a story of ambition, endurance, and perhaps tragedy on a scale we can barely imagine. Maybe the copper built the prestige of a people we no longer remember, forged into gifts or rituals that transcended utility. Maybe it sits today deep in forgotten burial mounds, or dissolved into rivers over thousands of years. Or maybe, just maybe, it fueled networks of exchange so vast they reshaped early societies in ways we've yet to comprehend. So the next time you see the bright glint of copper, whether in modern wire or antique jewelry, consider the hands that might have first pulled it from dark stone by torchlight, long before written words, long before even the faintest outlines of our own histories began. In the silent woods of Michigan, their legacy remains, whispering from every mossy pit that we were never the first to shape the earth, nor will we be the last to wonder at those who came before. Deep in the sun-scorched expanses of the Sahara, where golden dunes stretch endlessly under a merciless blue sky, there lie patches of earth that seem to break the very laws of physics. Here, travelers have long whispered of places where compasses spin without reason, needles quivering and dancing as if under the spell of unseeing hands. Pilots flying above these tracks report instrument panels glitching or altimeters jumping erratically strange disturbances that vanish the moment they leave these invisible borders. To many, such tales might sound like exaggerations born from the desert's disorienting vastness. But modern expeditions have verified at least some of these anomalies. Teams carrying sensitive magnetometers have charted zones where magnetic readings fluctuate violently without clear geological cause. These are not mild deviations. They are sharp, erratic swings that baffle scientists and leave standard explanations wanting. The anomalies cluster most heavily around a region in central Algeria, close to where the Hoggar Mountains rear up from the sands like the bones of some slumbering titan. Among these jagged peaks and rocky plains stand clusters of ancient stone structures, some solitary, others arranged in rough circles or lines stretching for hundreds of meters. Many resemble dolmens and menhirs found in Europe, though these are cruder, worn by time and almost swallowed by drifting dunes. Archaeologists believe these megaliths date back more than 6,000 years, remnants of a period when the Sahara was not a desert, but a lush land of lakes and grasslands teeming with wildlife. Rock art nearby depicts giraffes, hippos, and herds of cattle, a lost Eden painted on cave walls and stone outcrops. But while the images tell of a vanished ecosystem, they do little to explain the deep mystery beneath the surface. Local Tuareg tribes who have roamed these lands for centuries with their caravans and camels carry stories older than any written history. They speak of places in the desert where the stones themselves sing, not with voices, but with low vibrations that drift through the sand at night. Travelers who sleep too close awaken with strange dreams, or an unshakable sense that something watched them while they lay vulnerable under the stars. In some accounts, those who rested directly upon certain flat stones woke with noses bleeding or claimed they felt a deep buzzing in their bones that lingered for days. Such stories were long dismissed by outsiders as folklore born of isolation and hardship. Yet the peculiar magnetic disturbances seem to align all too closely with these oral traditions. Scientists have floated various hypotheses. Some suggest that vast iron-rich deposits beneath the sands could distort local magnetic fields. Others speculate about buried meteorites, since the Sahara is known to be littered with fragments from ancient cosmic impacts. Indeed, some small craters in the area are surrounded by high concentrations of nickel-iron debris. But this fails to account for the more linear or geometric patterns of disturbance, which sometimes trace paths eerily similar to the alignments of the surface megaliths. A more speculative line of inquiry points to the stones themselves. Some of the monoliths, when tested, exhibit unusually high magnetic susceptibility, far greater than typical sandstone or granite found in the area. If these stones were deliberately quarried from magnetic deposits and arranged by ancient hands into specific formations, it might suggest a lost understanding of Earth's invisible forces. What purpose could such knowledge have served? Some fringe researchers propose that the megaliths functioned as a kind of crude geomagnetic network, perhaps for ritual purposes tied to fertility, seasonal cycles, or even navigation. Others go further, suggesting they could have been an early experiment in channeling telluric currents, the natural electrical charges that move through the ground. Believing such flows might influence crops, health, or spiritual experiences. The Tuareg offer a simpler, if no less profound, interpretation. According to their elders, the stones were placed by the old people, beings who walked the green Sahara before it turned to dust. They say the singing of the stones is a memory echoes of grief, perhaps, for a world lost to time and climate. To them, the stones are not machines, but mourners. Attempts to excavate beneath the largest megalith clusters have often ended prematurely. Equipment fails more frequently in these zones. Ground-penetrating radar becomes muddied by unexplained interference, and even satellite imagery sometimes blurs at key coordinates, as though distorted by unseen hands. Whether this is merely coincidental technical failure or something more, elusive remains a contentious debate. Yet the mystery persists, tantalizing and unsolved. From the perspective of modern physics, there is no known mechanism by which rows of standing stones could generate magnetic fields powerful enough to spin a compass. Nor should the natural magnetism of local rocks be sufficient to disrupt aircraft electronics. And still the instruments misbehave, the compasses dance, and the legends endure. At dusk, when the desert cools and shadows stretch long across the sands, one can almost imagine standing amidst those ancient stones and feeling a pulse of faint, trembling heartbeat, not your own, but rising from the ground. It might be nothing but the mind's surrender to isolation and the haunting beauty of this vast, empty place. Or it might be a real song, too low for our ears, too old for our sciences, still singing beneath the dunes long after its composers vanished into myth. So travelers tread lightly in these parts of the Sahara. They keep their distance from the whispering stones and mark their camps with cautious reverence. Because even if we cannot fully explain what hums beneath this desert, some instinct older than language tells us to respect it, and to wonder, as countless have before, whether the sand truly conceals not just stones, but secrets that were never meant for us to uncover. Off the storm-battered coasts of Wales, and in the shallows above the long-drowned land known as Doggerland, there lies a hidden world, one that only appears when tides pull back and the sea reluctantly gives up its secrets. There, beneath swirling gray waters and thick beds of silt, lie the ghostly remains of ancient forests. Trees that once stood proud under sunlit skies now sleep beneath waves, locked and embraced by peat and mud, their trunks dark and waterlogged but astonishingly intact. Along the Welsh coast, near places like Borth and Cardigan Bay, locals have grown accustomed to the sight. During especially low tides or after violent storms, the sea peels back its usual cloak and reveals broad mats of peat studded with stumps and even fallen branches. The sight is eerie, a drowned woodland stretching across the beach, where once birds might have nested and children chased through underbrush. Some of these trees still bear the marks of axes, as though their felling happened only yesterday. But carbon dating places them around 4,500 to 6,000 years ago, when the coastline lay far beyond its current reach. Farther out in the North Sea lies Doggerland, a name given by modern scientists to what was once a sprawling plain that connected Britain to mainland Europe. Some call it the Stone Age Atlantis, for before it vanished beneath rising seas roughly 8,000 years ago, it was home to dense forests, meandering rivers, and teeming wildlife. The people who lived there hunted red deer and aurochs, fished rich estuaries, and carved tools from antler and bone. They built temporary camps or perhaps even more permanent settlements on gentle hills that are now silent elevations on the seafloor. When fishermen today drag their nets across the Dogger Bank, a shallow plateau in the North Sea, they sometimes pull up more than cod and sole. There have been skulls of elk, tusks of woolly mammoth, and even worked flints that clearly once rested in human hands. Occasionally, a piece of ancient wood appears, still bearing growth rings from a time when that wood stood tall in fresh air. Scientists using sonar mapping have revealed ghost rivers etched into the seabed, channels that once cut through fertile valleys, now eerily still. In some places, peat deposits extend for miles under the water, preserving pollen and seeds from vanished meadows. These samples tell us Doggerland was not a barren wasteland but a green, thriving landscape, likely dotted with small groups of people who lived off its generous resources. But then, slowly at first, and then with devastating speed, the sea rose. Some of this was due to the final melting of the great ice sheets that had weighed down much of northern Europe. As the glaciers retreated, land once pushed low began to rebound, altering coastlines unpredictably. Meanwhile, vast quantities of meltwater poured into oceans, lifting their levels worldwide. Then came the Storegga slide, A catastrophic undersea landslide off the coast of Norway around 8,200 years ago. It sent a massive tsunami hurtling across the North Sea. Waves swept far inland, overwhelming Doggerland's low plains and erasing entire habitats in hours. What survived the flood was soon claimed by the steadily encroaching sea, until only isolated islands remained, and finally, not even those. The people who once walked those forests must have witnessed this slow drowning. Archaeologists believe they retreated higher and higher until there was nowhere left to go, dispersing into what are now the British Isles and continental Europe, carrying with them stories of lands swallowed by water. Some wonder if such memories later evolved into flood myths found across countless cultures, each echoing the terror of watching familiar ground vanish beneath relentless tides. Back along the Welsh coast, modern visitors stand among the exposed stumps at low tide, marveling at how the peat preserved not only the wood, but even root systems. It feels less like standing on a beach and more like trespassing in some submerged temple. A solemn grove caught between worlds. You can trace with your hand the grooves of bark, still rough despite thousands of years beneath salt and sand. Sometimes, shards of hazelnuts or hoofprints from deer are found embedded nearby, whispering of a time when this was a thriving woodland. The preservation is so complete because of the peat, which forms in waterlogged places devoid of oxygen. Without air, decay slows to a near standstill, locking organic material in time's tight grasp. In this way, these forests have endured long past the people and animals who once relied on them. What haunts scientists and dreamers alike is the thought of what else lies hidden beneath shallow seas all over the world. Doggerland and the Welsh coastal forests are just the most visible pieces of a puzzle that stretches across submerged continental shelves. In some places, there may yet rest entire settlements, huts with hearths still heaped with charcoal, tools scattered where they were dropped in panic, graves of people who never imagined the ocean would someday flow over their heads. The drowned forests remind us how fleeting dominance over nature truly is. For thousands of years, humans walked these lands, confident in the constancy of soil beneath their feet. Then the sea advanced, indifferent and inexorable, reclaiming what rivers and rain had once yielded. Now the waters hold those stories close, releasing glimpses only when moon and wind conspire to pull the tides far enough away. Standing among the blackened stumps with the surf whispering around your ankles, it's easy to imagine the sigh of wind through leaves long vanished. To hear, perhaps faint laughter or the bark of a distant deer. In these moments, the lost forests breathe again, reminding us that where today there is ocean, yesterday there were paths, hearths, and dreams. And tomorrow, perhaps, the sea will march farther still, writing its own stories over ours, as it always has. In the end, all these stories, whether of cities swallowed by waves, stones that whisper beneath the desert moon, or forgotten vaults sealed by hands we no longer remember, converge upon a single unsettling truth. We dwell upon a world whose deepest narratives remain largely unwritten, whose oldest chapters lie buried beneath strata of time and silence. Our ancestors walked plains now hidden under the sea, worshipped beneath stars that shone upon continents arranged differently, and built monuments whose true purposes are lost to even our boldest imaginations. We like to think of history as a long, clear road stretching behind us, each milestone carved with neat dates and the triumphs of our species. But the more we dig into ice cores, ocean floors, hidden vaults under mossy hills, the more it seems we are not standing on a road at all, but on the cracked mosaic of countless forgotten paths, their origins obscured, their destinations vanished. Consider the magnetic stones in the Sahara, whose megalithic alignments may hint at a science lost, or the drowned forests beneath the North Sea that once cradled thriving villages. Think of the cavern walls painted with enormous, sorrowful eyes in remote caves, as though pleading across millennia for us to understand something vital we have long overlooked. Even the humble shards of pottery pulled from peat bogs speak softly. Of lives lived so differently, of people who watched the tides inch ever closer, or who listened for voices in rocks that might guide their planting and their prayers. And yet, the strangest revelation is not just how much we've forgotten, but how we keep stumbling upon faint echoes of that past in our myths and stories. Almost every culture clings to tales of floods that remade the world, of civilizations toppled by wrathful skies or heaving earth. We dismiss these as allegories, morality plays invented to soothe primal fears. But what if they're not? What if they are dim memories, passed down like a smoldering coal from hearth to hearth, across unthinkable generations, each telling less precise than the last, but each preserving some essential kernel of truth? The old epics that speak of deluges, giants, or visitors from distant lands may be distorted recountings of disasters like the Storega, tsunami, or migrations across lands now submerged. The chants that warn of mountains that hum or deserts that sing could be garbled testimonies of real anomalies, once observed but never fully understood. Perhaps these weren't cautionary fables invented from whole cloth, but desperate attempts to remember to etch warnings and wonders into the fragile medium of language when stone and wood could no longer serve. We also marvel at the scale of mystery. Entire continents of human experience have crumbled into oblivion. Climate shifts, sea level rises, and the slow grind of tectonic forces have obliterated entire epochs of our story. What remains are scattered clues of forest emerging, ghost-like from the tide, a pattern of magnetic interference that tugs a compass needle, a vault sealed so meticulously it still defies intrusion. Each discovery is like finding a torn page from a novel whose beginning and end are lost. And so we walk among ruins. We dive among coral-crusted walls that once held marketplaces or homes. We look at the stone rows of forgotten deserts and try to reconstruct the minds that arranged them. Who stood here? What did they fear? What did they love so fiercely they sought to preserve it in monuments of granite and basalt? Did they succeed? Are we their living memory, or did everything they knew vanish save for these mute, half-submerged sentinels? Even our most rigorous sciences stand somewhat humbled before these enigmas. Radiocarbon dates, DNA sequences, magnetic readings all offer invaluable glimpses. But they can only whisper about the surface facts. How old? What isotope? Which genetic marker? They cannot conjure back the songs sung around fires, the laughter of children chasing each other through vanished groves, or the trembling hands of those who sealed their knowledge into stone jars before disappearing from history. For that, we must lean on imagination, empathy, and the old instincts that still thrill to mystery. Perhaps that is why these stories endure, not because they terrify or confuse, but because they remind us that we are participants in an ancient drama whose full script lies scattered. They restore a sense of humility. We see ourselves as masters of Earth, charting its every continent, dissecting its atoms, peering into the birth of stars. Yet under our feet may sleep machines not made by us, city streets gritted by hands we cannot name, or silent libraries waiting for a key we have not yet forged. These unwritten epilogues of humanity caution us against arrogance. They beckon us to keep searching, to continue brushing sand from inscriptions and drilling cores into glaciers, to fly sonar over drowned plateaus and lower cameras into hidden vaults. Not simply for the thrill of revelation, but because each mystery solved folds another hidden story into the long collective biography of who we are. So next time you hear an old legend, a city lost to pride, a stone that speaks, a flood that cleansed a tainted world, pause before dismissing it. Somewhere in the sediment of these tales may lie the last fragile fossils of truths too vast for our brief modern memory to fully grasp. And as long as we wonder, as long as we yearn to understand, those forgotten people and their vanished worlds will not be entirely lost. In this way, the past still breathes through us, writing its final chapters on the uncertain parchment of our own unfolding time. In a dimly lit side room of a modest coastal museum in southern Italy, a curious artifact rests behind thick glass. Tourists drift by without pausing, drawn instead to brighter displays of Roman armor or glittering Byzantine icons. Few stop to study the small, time-worn disc, roughly the size of a dinner plate, carved from ivory so ancient it has yellowed to a ghostly cream. Its surface is etched with strange coastlines, arcs, and delicate geometric marks that look almost accidental until you see them for what they are. A map. The disc was unearthed in 1902 beneath the rubble of a crumbling watchtower. The tower itself was layered history Roman foundations topped by medieval brickwork, all slumped toward the sea by centuries of shifting earth. It was during efforts to salvage architectural stones that workers cracked open a hollow cavity in the foundation. Inside lay a small bronze box wrapped in decayed linen. And within that box, as though carefully hidden from the ruin unfolding above, was this single piece of carved ivory. At first, scholars dismissed it as a curiosity, a symbolic map, perhaps like those mythical medieval depictions of Eden or Hell. But close study quickly challenged that comfort. The disc showed coastlines, sharp, jagged, incredibly precise, carved with a craftsmanship suggesting more than artistic fancy. Mountain ranges were scored with tiny notches, rivers traced in impossibly fine lines. But none of these matched known ancient cartography. There were no familiar shapes of Italy or Greece, no comforting outlines of the Mediterranean. Instead, the disc portrayed a world both intimately familiar and hauntingly wrong. One landmass closely resembled Antarctica but startlingly free of ice. Another showed a swollen extension of northern Africa bulging out into the Atlantic. And most bizarre of all was a large island sprawled across what we know today as the empty heart of the Indian Ocean. Academic debate erupted. Some called it a ritual object, perhaps meant to symbolize a spiritual or mythic geography rather than real continents. Others suggested it might have been carved from memory by sailors exaggerating coastlines. But the arguments crumbled under closer scrutiny. When modern researchers overlaid the disc's carvings with satellite data, a chilling alignment emerged. 5 tiny dots, arranged like a cluster of stars on the lower quadrant of the map, perfectly matched 5 submerged mountain peaks deep in the South Pacific. Peaks that geological surveys suggest last broke the ocean surface over 10,000 years ago. Before the end of the last ice age, it was a clue that shouldn't exist. Whoever carved this map did so from observations made when those summits still rose above the waves. Carbon dating of organic residue from the linen and wood fragments in the bronze box placed the burial of the artifact around 4,000 years ago. But the age of the ivory itself, examined through isotopic analysis, suggested it was already ancient at that time, perhaps double that age, or older still. It meant someone may have protected and passed down this disc for thousands of years before finally sealing it away beneath a coastal tower that itself would one day crumble into near obscurity. More troubling than the timelines were the maps. Geometric notations. Arcs and intersecting lines traced across the disk in patterns uncannily consistent with solar declinations. When digitally reconstructed, these markings aligned with the sun's position during solstices and equinoxes, not just for Italy, but for points spread across the globe. This implied a planetary awareness scholars believed impossible for any civilization of that age. And if the maker of the disk understood global geometry, how did they gather such knowledge? Among the quiet circles of archaeoastronomers and fringe historians, theories spread like wildfire. Some proposed a long-lost seafaring culture with knowledge of latitude and seasonal drift, wiped out by rising seas at the close of the Ice Age. Others took it further, arguing the map might represent a global trading network predating our earliest known cities Atlantis in sober, data-backed form. But the ivory disk also stoked deeper, darker musings. Was this simply a memory of the world as it once looked, recorded by hands that had seen these lands firsthand? Or was it a warning, an encoded message from a civilization that knew all too well how fragile coastlines could be when the ice melted and the seas rose? Critics, of course, called such ideas fanciful, dismissing them as wishful projections by those hungry for lost golden ages. They argued natural creativity, combined with vague geographic familiarity, could explain away the similarities. After all, coincidence is cheap currency in history. But that caution often faltered under the weight of the disk's silent testimony, its lines so delicate, yet so deliberate. Today, the ivory map remains in its glass case, poorly lit, its placard, bearing only a bland description, ritual object, circa 2000 BCE. Visitors glance at it for a moment before shuffling onto grander, more photogenic relics. Yet for those who've truly studied its etched curves, the cartographers, the geologists, the quiet dreamers who spend long nights comparing it to modern seafloor scans, it remains a tantalizing clue. Perhaps not to a lost continent, but to a lost understanding of the world, a chapter of humanity's story scrubbed clean by floods and time. If you stand before it long enough, ignoring the busloads of tourists and the fluorescent museum buzz, you might feel something eerie in its presence. The ivory seems almost warm under the glass, its lines a whispered promise of places that no longer exist, lands that once broke the horizon, under skies we can scarcely imagine, mapped by hands now dust. And maybe, just maybe, it's not only the past it calls to. Maybe it's a mirror for the future, hinting at how easily coastlines shift, how quickly oceans rise, how soon what feels eternal becomes a ghost under the waves. The map that shouldn't exist remains right here, waiting for someone to finally listen to what it's been trying to say for thousands upon thousands of years. High above the lifeless shores of the Dead Sea, where salt-crusted winds whisper like restless ghosts, lies a scatter of stone foundations known simply as Qumran. From a distance, it is nothing, just pale scars upon the earth, broken walls, and half-buried chambers that the desert seems eager to swallow. Yet step closer, and it feels as if you have wandered into a memory that does not belong to you. The ground here is dry, packed with salt and fine dust that clings to your skin. Small lizards dart between jagged stones. Even in daylight, a hush hangs over the ruins, so complete that your own heartbeat seems an intrusion. Archaeologists first arrived hoping to catalog simple things, shards of pottery, the outline of humble homes, the small forgotten relics of daily life. Instead, their spades struck upon long, narrow rooms lined with low benches, as though waiting for solemn assemblies that would never return. They found ritual baths carved deep into bedrock, designed to hold water in a place that receives barely a few inches of rain each year. And most astonishing of all, sealed inside clay jars in nearby caves, they found thousands of fragile parchment fragments, scriptures, hymns, records, words older than empires, written by hands long turned to dust. These were the Dead Sea Scrolls, and they told of laws, visions, and prophecies carefully hidden away. As if someone knew the world would one day hunger for forgotten truths. But among local Bedouin tribes, stories about Qumran are older still. They say this was never a place meant for ordinary living. Their grandfathers whispered of a brotherhood who lived apart from the world, men so consumed by their search for purity and secret knowledge that they forgot the taste of laughter. The Bedouins believed that, in the end, these seekers dug too deep into the earth and perhaps into mysteries not meant for mortal minds. There are stranger stories yet. Shepherds who roam the hills with their flocks speak of seeing lantern lights, drifting through the ruins, weaving between stone walls where no living hand carries them. Others have followed the soft rise and fall of chanting voices, only to find themselves standing alone by empty cisterns that echo back words in languages no one now speaks. At dusk, when the sun melts into the copper horizon and the air grows heavy, The stones of Qumran seem almost to breathe. They hold their warmth long after the sky fades, and if you rest your palm against them, it feels as though something stirs beneath some faint pulse, like a city dreaming of days long vanished. The Dead Sea itself offers no comfort. It lies below, silent and immense, so dense with salt that nothing can live in its depths. When the wind comes, its surface becomes a perfect mirror, reflecting the bruised colors of twilight, doubling the sense of a world turned upside down. Travelers who linger by its shores speak of strange dizziness, as if gravity itself is uncertain here. Night at Qumran arrives with startling swiftness. Shadows gather first in the hollows of old doorways, then stretch greedily across the ground. Bats wheel overhead, hunting insects drawn to the last glow of the sky. In that deepening dark, imagination runs wild. Was that a figure slipping behind a wall? A murmur from the ritual baths? Or simply the wind, teasing at the edges of fear? Modern scholars have many theories about Qumran. Some insist it was merely an austere settlement of scribes and priests, devoted to copying sacred texts far from the corruptions of Jerusalem. Others suspect it served as a kind of fortress, its inhabitants guardians of treasures or truths, too dangerous to keep in the cities. A few go further still, suggesting that under these stones lie tunnels and hidden vaults where objects of power were concealed. Their location lost to time and politics alike. But for all the confident papers and carefully labeled museum cases, Qumran keeps its final secrets. The stones do not speak, the baths remain dry, and the narrow rooms stand empty under the tireless gaze of the sun. And yet, on certain nights when clouds scatter and the stars blaze with unsettling clarity, people say the whole valley seems to lean closer listening. If you stand very still, they claim, you might hear soft chanting rising from beneath your feet, as though the earth itself remembers the prayers once poured into it. You might feel the press of old eyes watching from every cracked doorway, waiting to see what you will do next. In those moments, Qumran becomes more than stones and dust. It becomes a question, hanging heavy in the salt-thick air. What did these people truly find here, high above a sea where nothing lives? And what might still linger, patient and unseen, among these silent watchers of stone? Close your eyes. Let the world you know, your ceiling, your walls, your gentle breathing, fade for a moment, so that only the quiet rhythm of your pulse remains. You've just traveled through a labyrinth of lost cities, sunken forests, ancient machines, and stone oracles. The shapes of these mysteries still linger in your mind, like afterimages when you look away from a bright light. And as you lie here, warm and safe, a different landscape starts to unfold, not of roads and familiar doors, but of shadowed meadows, forgotten coastlines, and vaults that breathe beneath moss and earth. Imagine you are drifting above the world. Below you is a map that doesn't quite match the one hanging in classrooms or pinned behind travel agent desks. Here, in this dream realm, the edges blur, coastlines twist into unfamiliar arcs, and entire lands rise where only ocean should be. It's a memory of Earth not recorded in books, a patchwork of stories whispered by stone, by water, by the slow patience of time. Far below, you see where Doggerland once lay, stretching broad and green between Britain and Europe. Rivers curve through fertile plains, forests rustle under the sigh of a temperate wind, and small figures move along game trails, spears and baskets in hand. They do not look up to see you, the dreamer. They are busy with life, laughing, calling, following the seasons. Somewhere, a mother hushes her child to sleep in a hut that will vanish beneath the sea before 1,000 more moons have passed. Drift onward, and the vision changes. Now you hover over the Great Lakes, long before railroads and smokestacks. Here, dark forests meet glittering water, and on hidden ridges, men stand by pits cut deep into the earth, pulling out copper with tools of stone and bone. They sing work songs whose melodies are lost to us, their echoes swallowed by pines that have since fallen rotted, and risen again in countless cycles. Where did all that copper go? What was it shaped into? By hands that left so few traces of themselves. Further still, and the sands of the Sahara stretch beneath you, not as an endless desert, but as a patchwork of savanna, lakes, and forests. Herds cluster around watering holes. Villages cling to shaded groves. Somewhere amid these early oases, massive stones stand upright in careful rings or lines, placed by people who raised their eyes to stars and felt compelled to mark where the heavens touched earth. Those stones hum faintly in your dream hearing, as if telling you they were never just rocks, but pages of a skybound book now half buried under drifting dunes. The world tilts, and you find yourself above the Black Sea, but it's shallower now, the waterline held back by earth not yet fractured. Beneath your drifting feet, the silhouettes of villages spread out in orderly grids, streets busy with carts and animals, with potters and fishers and children darting after dogs. You see no flood yet, no vast wall of salt water. But you know, it's coming. In the way of dreams, you sense time not as a line but as a tide itself, always poised to rise and carry everything away. The earth beneath you is so alive, so full of hidden stories. Even its quiet places vibrate with secrets. In caves whose entrances gape like old mouths, thousands of painted eyes watch you pass. They are enormous, solemn, some kind, some sorrowful, others eerily blank. They belong to figures who stand rooted on walls of ochre and ash, arms raised not in menace but perhaps in greeting or warning. No one today can say for certain what they meant, these watchers with eyes too large for human skulls. Maybe they weren't human at all. Maybe they were what humans feared or hoped to become. Now your drifting slows, and you stand upon a rocky ledge. Before you rises the sealed monastery vault, its stone dark and polished, whispering coolness even through the dream air. It feels less like a room than a heart, locked tight around a truth too powerful to share. Shelves of pressurized jars line the walls inside, filled with mysterious metallic powders that catch dim light and glow faintly, almost as if breathing. In the center sits the tablet heavy, scored with lines that dance into meaning when your gaze lingers. For a moment you nearly grasp it. Then the vision shivers like a mirage over hot sand, and the meaning is gone, slipping away into depths you're not ready to follow. Why do these dreams matter? Why do we lie awake or let ourselves drift towards sleep haunted by questions about ruins and forests drowned long before our first ancestors carved stories into bark or stone? Perhaps it's because these forgotten places, these half-remembered maps and whispered legends, connect us to a deeper lineage, not of nations or empires, but of wonder, of longing, of people who, just like you, lay awake under dark skies full of strange stars, and wondered what came before them and what would come after. Perhaps it's because the earth itself is an old storyteller, more ancient than any of us, whose voice is etched in tectonic scars and river deltas, in fossil beds and sunken streets. It has seen more than our entire line of memory can encompass. It remembers when seas were smaller, when ice lay heavy upon continents, when forests grew where now coral reefs blossom, and it has carried the bones and dreams of every creature across its vast epochs. If you could place your ear to its crust, really listen, you might hear that slow narrative unfolding. The grinding of plates that lifts mountains, the sigh of sand as it buries and reveals, the distant hiss of magma threading veins of new land beneath oceans. Every now and then, when conditions are just right, that story breaches the surface. A drowned tree still gripping its roots, a compass spinning madly above buried iron rings, a vault that refuses to share its contents, a cavern painted by hands. Guided by fears or memories, we can only guess. As you sink deeper into rest, let yourself wonder what else sleeps beneath your feet. What memories are locked in limestone? What footprints are pressed into ancient clay? What voices still echo faintly in chambers, hollowed long ago by water and time? The earth is full of these quiet places, still holding breath against discovery, and maybe, in the tender vulnerability that comes just before sleep, you realize something else, that some mysteries are meant to stay mysterious. Not because they defy understanding, but because they offer a communion with awe, a reminder that not everything must be dissected and named to be real. Some things are truest when they remain questions, beckoning us onward. So breathe in. Let your body sink heavier into your bed. Let the images fade, a stone tablet inscribed with lines you can't quite read. A city grid traced by sonar beneath a modern bay. A giant's causeway stepping into fog. They're still there, waiting, even as you slip away. Perhaps tonight, your dreams will carry you farther, letting you walk old streets under unfamiliar constellations, or stand upon promontories now lost to waves, watching ships that never return. And if you wake in the dark, heart quickened by the echo of footsteps in dream corridors, smile softly. Somewhere out there, or deep within, stories continue telling themselves, even without listeners. The world is older than memory, wiser than history, stranger than fiction. It holds its secrets not cruelly, but with the patient grace of something that knows all things unfold in their season, including understanding. So let go now. Drift. There are still chapters waiting to be uncovered, by you or by those who come long after. And somewhere beneath layered stone or salted waves or drifting dunes, the earth is whispering them still, hoping someone will pause, listen closely, and carry a new story back into the fragile light of tomorrow.